The Young and the Restless spoilers. The hospital lights flickered like a dying conscience, sterile and silent, while Sharon stood in the corridor trying to steady her breathing. Her entire world had collapsed within a single heartbeat, and it was as if every wall around her was whispering the name she had buried years ago, Matt. Mitch, the man she had thought was a mere acquaintance from her volunteer work, had returned under that false name, but now the truth clawed at her memory like a ghost refusing to rest. He was Matt, the man who once consumed her youth, the one she thought she'd escaped, the one whose shadow she had built her new life around without realizing it. Sharon's reflection in the hospital window looked pale, haunted, as though her body still stood but her soul had already been found guilty of something she could never explain. Behind the door, Noah lay still, recovering, oblivious to the storm that was about to tear apart the only family he had ever known. Nick had sensed something wrong long before Sharon had the courage to admit it. He remembered the way she trembled each time that man appeared, the way her eyes avoided his gaze as if caught in a private nightmare. The name Matt had surfaced once during a sleepless night, buried beneath years of silence, but Nick had been too blind, too trusting, too in love to question it. Now, standing at the foot of their son's hospital bed, he could feel that love curdling into something cold and irreversible. The quiet rhythm of the heart monitor was the only sound between them, but in Nick's mind, it was already the ticking of a bomb. He had done the one thing Sharon never thought he would, he tested the truth. A DNA test, driven by suspicion, not malice, by instinct, not logic, but the results were merciless. The paper had burned in his hands long before he tore it apart. Noah was not his son. The match belonged to another man. The name that had haunted his wife's eyes now branded itself into his own rage, Matt. The man who had returned under a false identity had not just come to taunt the past, he had come to claim what he unknowingly left behind. When Nick confronted Sharon, her silence was not denial, it was surrender. She had been living inside this lie for so long that even the truth had lost its meaning. Years ago, when she discovered she was pregnant, she convinced herself it had to be Nick's child. It was easier, safer, cleaner. But deep down, in the spaces between guilt and survival, she knew. She knew the moment Noah was born, with those eyes that mirrored another man's. Still, she had chosen the illusion of family over the horror of memory. Now that illusion had cracked beyond repair. Nick's voice rose, not in anger but in disbelief, as though the air itself refused to carry his words. He wanted to unhear what he already knew, to unsee the truth that had destroyed him, but the image of that report, his name crossed out by fate, would never fade. Sharon's tears blurred the edges of reality, but no apology could undo the chain reaction that had already begun. Matt, or Mitch, or whatever he wanted to be called, stood frozen in the doorway when Nick revealed everything. His face drained of color, not from guilt but from a violent awakening of something he hadn't prepared to feel, fatherhood. For years he had thought his connection to Sharon was a closed chapter, one marked by recklessness and regret, but now it had rewritten itself into a living, breathing consequence lying in that hospital bed. The truth landed like a physical blow, and his hands shook not from anger but from a grief he didn't yet understand. He had missed Noah's childhood, his laughter, his milestones, all traded for the anonymity of a man who thought he could outrun his past. Now he stood at the center of it, unwanted, uninvited, but undeniable. Nick's fury filled the room until the machines themselves seemed to flinch. He felt betrayed not only by Sharon but by time, by the years he had spent being someone's father under false pretenses, pouring love into a bond built on deceit. He could remember every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every moment he had sworn to protect Noah, and now those memories turned against him like ghosts of a stolen life. The betrayal was too intimate to name. Sharon tried to speak, but her words collapsed under the weight of her own shame. Every excuse she could think of sounded like a confession, every explanation another wound. She had thought she was protecting everyone, Nick, Noah, even Matt, but in truth, she had only been protecting her own fear. Matt stepped closer, his voice steady but cold, his anger born not of righteousness but of disbelief that Sharon could hide something so monumental. He had lost decades of his son's life, and the realization crushed whatever remnants of empathy he might have had left for her. The irony was suffocating, 3 adults trapped in a sterile hospital room, bound together by a single boy who had no idea that his existence was built on lies. Nick's hands trembled as he pulled the DNA results from his pocket again, a physical symbol of the reality that had shattered him. He read them aloud, not because Sharon hadn't heard them, but because he needed the air itself to acknowledge what she had done. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. It was the kind of silence that kills love. Sharon's mind spiraled backward through every moment she could have told the truth and didn't. The nights when Nick held her hand, the mornings when Noah smiled, the times she almost confessed but swallowed the words because she couldn't bear to see that look in Nick's eyes, the one she was seeing now. It was too late for regret, the damage was irreversible. Matt's rage was volcanic but restrained, an inner eruption that twisted his expression into something unreadable. He wanted to strike out, to demand explanations, but the sight of Noah, fragile and unaware, froze him in place. The boy didn't deserve this. None of them did. But Sharon had made a choice years ago, and now the bill had come due. Nick stepped back, his voice hoarse from disbelief. He could not bear the sight of Sharon any longer, not because he hated her, but because he no longer recognized her. The woman he had loved had vanished, replaced by someone he didn't know, a stranger wearing his wife's face. He looked at Matt, and for the first time, there was no rivalry, only the sick realization that they had both been played by the same illusion. Still, the thought of Noah calling another man dad felt like being erased from existence. Sharon sank into the chair, her body collapsing under invisible weight. She wanted to explain that it wasn't premeditated, that she had truly loved Nick, that she had wanted to believe the child was his. But the truth was not interested in intention, it only cared about facts, and the fact was merciless. Noah's blood carried Matt's signature, not Nick's. The world she had built on half-truths had finally come crashing down. Outside, the storm clouds gathered over Genoa City, as if the heavens themselves understood the tragedy that had unfolded inside that room. Nick walked toward the door but stopped before leaving. His voice broke as he asked the question that would echo long after he was gone: how long would she have kept lying? Until Noah grew up? Until he died not knowing the truth? Sharon had no answer. Her silence was the confession. Matt turned away, his thoughts a maelstrom of guilt and anger. He had come to see Sharon, perhaps to rekindle something, perhaps to understand what went wrong, but instead he had uncovered a secret that changed the definition of his own life. He wasn't sure if he was ready to be a father, but he knew he could no longer pretend he wasn't. Nick's footsteps faded down the hall, each one a severed tie to the family he thought he had. Sharon sat motionless, staring at the lifeless DNA report in her hands. It was more than paper, it was a verdict. And as she looked at Noah's unconscious face, she realized the cruel symmetry of fate. The truth she had feared to tell had finally destroyed the very love she had tried to protect. The machines kept beeping, indifferent to the ruin around them, while outside, thunder rolled across the night. The storm had only just begun, and somewhere in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, Sharon understood that forgiveness would never come, not from Nick, not from Matt, and perhaps not even from herself. The chaos broke through the sterile calm of the hospital like an earthquake, shaking every fragile illusion that still clung to the remnants of Sharon's world. She clutched Noah against her chest, her tears spilling down his pale cheeks as if trying to cleanse him of the sins she had dragged into his life. Her sobs came in waves. Raw, broken, uncontrollable. There was no longer a way to pretend, no more corners to hide in. The secrets she had spent years burying had clawed their way to the surface, tearing through her like glass. She could feel the judgment in every breath Nick took, the disgust in the way he looked at her, as though she had become something unrecognizable, something impure. Her world had gone silent except for the beeping of Noah's heart monitor and the pounding of her own heartbeat that refused to slow down. Nick's face had hardened into something unholy, a mask of betrayal and disbelief. He didn't speak at first, because words were too small for the violence building inside him. He had given everything to protect his family, only to discover that the very foundation of it was built on lies. All the love, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, now they were ash in his mouth. He looked at Matt and saw not a man but a thief, a living embodiment of everything that had been stolen from him. The DNA results were no longer just paper, they were a weapon, a declaration that his life had been a cruel performance staged by the two people who had hurt him most. When Matt tried to speak, when his lips dared to move toward explanation, Nick snapped. He lunged without thought, years of repressed fury exploding into motion. His fist connected with Matt's jaw, a sound that echoed like thunder through the room. Sharon screamed, but Nick didn't stop. Blow after blow landed, each one a desperate attempt to make the pain make sense, to externalize what was eating him alive. Matt tried to defend himself, but the guilt in his eyes slowed him, made him heavy, as though he agreed with every hit. He had taken something that wasn't his, even if by accident, and now the universe demanded repayment in blood. Sharon screamed again, louder this time, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. She threw herself between them, her body trembling as she tried to push Nick away, but his fury was too strong, too wild to reason with. He didn't see her anymore, not as the woman he loved, not as the mother of his son, but as the architect of his humiliation. Her pleas fell into the void as his fist struck again. Matt fell back against the wall, his face bleeding, his eyes dazed but still burning with the kind of pain that came from knowing he deserved every hit. Then came the faintest sound, small and broken, but it froze the room. Noah had woken. His eyes, still heavy with medication, flickered open just in time to see his father, his supposed father, beating another man while his mother screamed. Confusion clouded his expression, followed by a fear so raw it pierced through the chaos like a knife. Sharon saw it and felt her heart split. This was the nightmare she had been trying to avoid, the moment when her lies became her child's trauma. She tried to reach him, to speak his name, but the sobs choked her. Nick turned at the sound of Noah's weak voice, and in that instant, something inside him shattered again. He saw the boy's terrified face, the trembling lips, and realized that whatever war he was fighting, the casualty was innocence itself. Noah's breath came shallow, his pulse racing, the monitors screaming in protest as his body reacted to the stress. Doctors and nurses rushed in, their voices overlapping in urgency, but all Sharon could hear was the echo of her own guilt. She knew this wasn't just physical, it was the collapse of Noah's sense of safety, the destruction of the world he thought he understood. Security burst into the room as Sharon screamed for help. Two guards pulled Nick away from Matt, their grip tight against his flailing rage. His shirt was torn, his knuckles bleeding, but the fire in his eyes refused to dim. Sharon ran to Noah's bedside, holding his trembling hand, whispering apologies that came out as broken sobs. Nick's chest heaved as he glared at her from across the room, the betrayal still fresh, still pulsing through him like poison. To him, she was no longer Sharon, the woman he once trusted with his life, but the stranger who had made him a fool. Matt, bruised and bleeding, wiped the blood from his mouth and stared at the two of them. He didn't feel victorious, only hollow. He had discovered he was a father and lost everything in the same breath. The reality of it pressed down on him like lead. He wanted to approach Noah, to say something, anything, but Sharon's sharp glance stopped him cold. The room was now divided by invisible lines, Nick on one side, Sharon and Noah on the other, Matt somewhere in between, belonging to neither. Nick's voice finally came, hoarse and shaking with venom. He said nothing that could be undone, nothing that could be softened by apology. To him, Sharon was an enemy now, not out of hatred but because trust, once broken this deeply, could not be revived. The years they had spent together, the family they had built, now felt like an elaborate illusion. Every memory rewrote itself in his mind, every smile tainted with deceit. He could no longer look at Noah without seeing Matt's face, no longer touch Sharon without feeling contamination. As the guards led him away, his voice cracked through the air like lightning, full of rage and disbelief. He vowed never to forgive, never to forget. Sharon collapsed onto the floor beside Noah's bed, her cries swallowed by the sterile hum of machines. The staff moved around her, checking monitors, whispering in concern, but she heard none of it. She stared at Nick's retreating figure until the door slammed, leaving only the echo of destruction behind. Matt leaned against the wall, pressing a towel to his split lip, his breathing shallow, his eyes locked on the child who didn't yet understand that his entire life had just changed. Sharon turned toward him, their eyes meeting for the first time since the revelation, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Everything was exposed, every secret burned away, leaving only the wreckage of truth. Outside the hospital window, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain slashing against the glass in furious sheets. Sharon held Noah's hand tighter, afraid that if she let go, the world would collapse completely. She knew that even if his body healed, the scars would remain, on his heart, on hers, on the family that no longer existed. Nick's absence was a void that swallowed the air, and the knowledge that she had become his enemy cut deeper than any wound. She had lost him, lost the life she built, and now faced the only thing she had feared more than the truth itself, living with it. Matt stepped closer, wanting to say something, but Sharon turned away. There was no redemption here, no comfort that could erase the horror of what Noah had seen. The world had shifted irrevocably, and all that remained was silence, the kind that follows after everything has been destroyed. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant yet merciless, as if reminding her that storms never end when the rain stops. They linger, echoing in the spaces where love once lived. And as Sharon wept beside her son, she realized that some secrets, once freed, don't just destroy, they define everything that comes after.